Path of Exile 2, the Diablo 4 that we deserved.
So I was lucky enough to be able to fly to LA and try out Path of Exile 2. Now, I am someone new in Path of Exile. I've got about 800 hours into it, but even me...
800 hours into a game. New. Okay, buddy.
In my state was able to very quickly realize that Path of Exile 2 is fundamentally a lot different in gameplay than Path of Exile 1. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about my impressions and how I feel about the game, what I enjoyed about the game, what I did not like about the game, what class I played, and everything that I can remember basically from this. I also have some footage I'm going to be showing in the background that I will pair with the conversation at hand in order to give you guys the best viewing experience about what we're doing. So with that being said, let's just dive on into it. The game...
This is the logging screen, by the way.
Opens up with 3 different classes that you can play. There was Sorceress, Ranger, and Warrior. And if you know anything about me, I'm not a Bo Andy. I'm not going to play a Ranger. So I was like, give me the character that's got a mace and a shield. That seems for me. And part of the reason I picked that is because they announced while I was there that the Warrior actually had a new mechanic that was being showcased where the shield itself, you could hold the right click. I was using WASD movement. You could hold the right click, point where the cursor is going, and your character would pull the shield up and actually block all projectiles and damage coming from that direction. And you had...
That's interesting. Now, admittedly, that could be also a mechanic that they remove, because Path of Exile 2 looks great, obviously, but there are a couple of things I think they're going to change really fast. The weapon swapping combination abilities, if they don't wipe the full screen, no one's going to probably really use them. And, you know, a lot of small things like that. Skills that move you backward, that is definitely going to instantaneously go, no question about it. So, I wonder if this is going to have more mechanics attached to it, like if you get hit, you release a hit or spikes or something like that. It could be really cool, because by default, a mechanic like this is probably not going to survive on its own. So there must be something that this does additionally that you can build into potentially. And that would be awesome.
This bit of a stamina bar that allows you to absorb damage up to a certain point, then you get sort of staggered backwards. So it was a really cool way of avoiding damage that I thought I would like quite a bit. I ended up actually swapping out of the shield to a two-handed weapon because I realized there's the spacebar dodge roll that gives you iframes, and I almost felt dumb for having the shield and blocking everything when I can just dodge roll out of the way.
Oh yeah, also the fact that there's a dodge, I completely forgot about it. Yeah, there's gonna be some kind of mechanics around that, a build that you can do, or multiple, hopefully. Okay, nice.
And still have movement happening at the same time. So I ended up with a two-handed mace regardless. But I do think the shield was quite cool. In fact, you can even shield rush charge with the shield that allows you to block projectiles while you're rushing with the shield. Really, really cool mechanic with the Warrior. So if you're somebody who likes a sword and shield or a sword and board style, then you are probably going to like this shield style of Warrior. And plus, with...
Oh, look at that. You can see the projectile stuck in his leg. That's a good attention to detail.
The weapon swap mechanics in Path of Exile 2 is a big...
But the crab running away from you, that's annoying, though.
Focal point in the game. Then you probably have a two-handed weapon and a sword and board style, and you can swap between them depending upon if you need sword and shield or if you're just trying to DPS. Now, right off the bat, the game opens up, and it is difficult from the get-go. I don't know if they had the difficulty pretty high, or if I'm just bad, or if this is the way that is...
Oh, that's something new.
...intended, but the potions do not refill from killing normal monsters. You only refill them from magic and rare monsters. And also, when you die, then you have to respawn at a checkpoint or in town, and when you do that, it respawns all of the minions on the map. So any of the progress that you would have made walking forward on that map would have been...
Also, it respawns the potions. When you go to town, your potions are not default refilled. I'm not sure, maybe they have changed it at this point, but the last I heard they didn't. Which is, by the way, again, another thing that's gonna go. There's a lot of small quality of life features that are definitely gonna change. So if you see something and you're like, this seems slightly a lot annoying, yeah, they're probably gonna change it. Because again, some things are good on paper, but they're, you know, they piss you off in actual game.
Been wiped out when you respawn, meaning that you need to be able to progress through the map with your character at hand in order to be able to continue, or otherwise you die, you're gonna have to do it all over again. Now, while this might sound
This also sounds a little bit questionable. It could work, but I don't know. This sounds something that's gonna make the not so good players really, really rage quit, I think.
Sounds somewhat annoying. I actually ended up quite liking this mechanic because first of all, it feels like a little bit of accomplishment when you beat the map in one go without like dying, getting halfway through. Okay, now I only have to do the back half on this life. You do have to beat the map sort of as intended. On the other side of it, it almost had like this built-in catch-up mechanic where if you are dying and having to reset the map and do it over and over again in the axe, then you're getting more experience and the loot that comes with that, and then eventually you're sort of caught up.
By the way, a movement skill like he's using here that moves you forward, considering it doesn't just move you forward in a straight line, but you can pick a direction, stuff like this is not going to be changed. Again, I'm talking about very specific things, like the meteor, asteroid, it's a meteor. The meteor that the sorceress can call down, the one that pushes you back and locks you into a unbreakable animation. Things like that 100% will get changed.
And there won't be a problem. And eventually I got to the point by Act 2 where I was just one-shotting almost everything, stun-locking the bosses, and just comboing stuff out with the two-handed mace, and I felt really, really strong. But in the beginning, it was rather difficult, and I feel like I needed those extra
Yeah, no joke. He's actually stun-locking the boss.
levels. One other thing I noticed that I did not like when I was testing the game was the consistent having to go back to town to get the potions. For instance, the sorceress was having this problem I was noticing with mana. People kept having to go back to town and they were complaining about, man, I have to go back to town and get mana all the time. Whereas a warrior, I was having this with HP because I'm always up there in the front taking damage.
Yeah, this is gonna change. And if you actually... So, this is the first we actually see this. Previously, we did not have this information about how much the potions are gonna refill. Maybe this is at the start, because obviously this is the very, very, very start of Act 1. Maybe that probably should change, right? But yeah, if this is gonna be a thing that's constant throughout the game, it's gonna get changed quickly, which is good. Good. Some things should be quality of life. And, well, clicking a bell to refill potions is definitely something like that. Diablo 3 actually did that at the start, if you remember. You needed to go to the town, and then you needed to speak to some dude or whatever, and then your potions got refilled. Yeah, that changed really fast because it was stupid.
I'm going to need to go back to town to get health potions. So I felt very disruptive because you have like a casting animation you do. It's no longer an instant pour though. So because of that, I'm having to like wait for an opening to cast the animation during the boss fight so I can go back to town and click on the well to refill the potion.
I think this is fine. I think this is actually kind of good because it adds a playable element to going back to the town in situations like this. I like it. I actually like it. I don't think this should be changed.
This seemed like fairly unanimous feedback from almost everyone involved in the test as far as I could tell, so this is probably going to change, I would imagine, before launch. Something I liked for sure was that the game definitely seemed to explain things better than Path of Exile 1. From the beginning, the concepts in the game were almost explaining themselves to you. For instance, the bosses, if it has an unblockable attack, were flashing red, so you know your shield ain't going to be able to block that. That is in fact an unblockable attack, and that's a mechanic that's in a lot of games. So some of these were fairly intuitive from the beginning.
Okay, this seems nice.
Some of them were not intuitive, however. For instance, the way skill gems work. You right-click on a uncut gem, you can cut it into a gem, you get to pick, and that was all fine and dandy. But then the skill gems themselves, at least for the warrior, were
Oh, there's nothing written about them?
locked to individual weapons, meaning I had a lot of mace weapons by time, or mace skills by time I was like level 10, 15, etc. So when I got like a good axe drop, I was like, oh, awesome, log in, boys, I got a good axe. But then I go to equip it, and suddenly I have 0 usable skills, because all of my abilities are for the mace, and I didn't really know what I could do about that. I just kind of stuck to mace the whole time because I couldn't recut my gems and I didn't have any extra gems. So there were some things that feel fundamentally either ill-explained or were not intuitive. Most of those things, however, were related to either the UI or understanding how the skills work, etc. But the thing that was the most intuitive was the combat. The bosses make sense when you are fighting them. You can tell, okay, this is where the hitbox is. This is where I'm supposed to avoid. You can understand what the mobs that you're fighting are about to do. They are very fairly telegraphed. So I felt like the combat, in my opinion, was some of the most enjoyable combat that I've had in almost any ARPG. It's almost what I was hoping Diablo 4's gameplay was going to be like: slow, dark, and gritty.
I also, by the way, like this. One of the biggest things that I don't like about PoE is that it's a zoomer game. If you're playing PoE and you're not clearing a map in one split of a second because boo 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 boo, you're playing it wrong. And I like slower paced games like that. I like it to be more methodical than haha, my damage numbers instantaneously wipe the screen and thus defense becomes irrelevant technically. Like a lot of things in PoE kind of tend to go nowadays. Well, this is a good change. I like this.
Now, I actually enjoyed this a lot because it felt more methodical. The word that I would use is intentional. It seems like the game wants you to have intentional movement. Think about every action you're actually performing in the game. For instance, when I'm playing the warrior, there was literally one ability that took 2.32 seconds in order to be able to cast. I'm talking a full 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3, and that's how long it took to even get that ability out. And I caution away from saying this, but it reminded me
The totem looks cool, by the way.
mostly of Ruthless in Path of Exile 1. The drops were definitely fewer and far between, though, but by the time I started to progress in Act 2, they started to pick up quite a bit more, so I think that was only an early game thing. The combat was definitely much more, each of the pack of mobs were dangerous. It wasn't just like, okay, I have to fight 50,000 mobs to get to the next map, let me just blow through them. Like, I was thinking about each one of the fights. Well, at least until Act 2, when I got a two-handed mace, some skill points on the tree, and I started literally one-shotting everything.
The tree. Are we finally gonna see anything about the tree? That would be amazing. Nope.
With my two-handed mace, it just took a few good rows. So I think you're only going to feel that way, and it's going to feel slow while you're learning the game in the first act and a half. Once you get some items, you're sort of back to blasting already. So if you're worried that Path of Exile 2 is going to be a completely different experience, you're not just going to be able to shred mobs, etc., I think it's only going to be that way until you get your character more built out. For me, the highlight of being able to play it was very easily the bosses.
By the way, you see what I mean? By the way, people are not going to be using swap weapons and combo skills like that. Because if he's right, then there's not going to be a reason to do that. Because you're going to be able to one-shot things later on in the game. So again, a couple of things seem kind of a little bit dead on arrival. But doesn't mean it's bad.
I think it's only going to be that way until you get your character more built out. For me, the highlight of being able to play it was very easily the bosses. The bosses themselves were all fundamentally unique. Each of them had their own personalities. Each of them had their own combat style. Each of them had their own mechanics in which I had to learn. And until I was able to like stun lock them with the two-handed mace, they actually all felt decently difficult. Jonathan Rogers said in one of the interviews that he wants people to die twice and that the third time they are able to defeat the bosses. And that does seem very apparent when you actually play the game. It seems like that has been tuned to make you die a couple times to figure it out. And then you go and you're like, okay, I got it this time. And then you can avoid the mechanics, etc. as you go through. The boss fights felt difficult, but fair. They are also very well themed. There was one boss fight where the guy turns into a wolf, and then he's running around the map and has other minions.
A sent-out wolf, it seems like.
That come out with him, and that seemed really cool. There was a boss that was like an executioner that is using a giant axe, and he actually starts the fight by chopping off the head of somebody and then coming at you with an axe. So there's all kinds of different style of bosses, and there's over 100 unique bosses in Path of Exile 2. And if all of them were at the level of what I saw just going through the first two acts, that is actually going to be fairly impressive. They released a lot of new information when I was there. One of it, in fact, was that there's actually mounts coming to the game, which is a cool little thing that got snuck in. You can actually run and attack from the top of a mount. So if you're a ranger with a bow, you can literally cast bow shots while you're riding on a mount, and that was completely new. But they also showed how interactions work in the game. So, for instance, you can lay like toxic spores on the ground as a ranger, and then if you activate the spores with your own poison, then they turn into like poison mines. So you can have flowers that shoot out tentacles and attack.
A bit slow. Definitely seems worth. Again, if the game is slow enough, by the way, this could work, but I doubt the game is going to be this slow at the end. So interesting how this will all play out.
the monsters around there, but you can actually poison and shoot the flower itself, increasing the amount of poison that the flower has when it attacks everybody. There's a lot of built-in combo-based mechanics that make individual moves interact with each other that is very different than the style of Path of Exile 1. In Path of Exile 1, I feel like I'm picking an ability, ramping in, jacking it to the tits to make it as strong as I possibly can so it one-shots everything on the entire screen. Whereas in Path of Exile 2, and again, the word comes back to intentional, I feel like I'm getting mobs together, grouping them up for a combo, laying down combo 1, piecing it together with combo 2, what have you. And that is a very different way of approaching the combat than I have seen in the original game. In fact, when I'm...
Well, to be honest, Path of Exile, when it started, was way slow. The Ruthless League is pretty much a good encompassing benchmark for what the game was at the very start. So, it was completely different. No one was zooming anywhere. You know, it didn't take one shot. You couldn't just one-shot every white mob in existence. It was essentially a completely different game. I liked it a little bit better. Again, I'm a fan of the slower and the methodical type of gameplay, not the zoom. But if you like the zoom, well, that's your problem, honestly, in life. No, don't get me involved or roped into it, okay? Whew. In any case, I like the slow, methodical things. And if the slow and methodical gameplay like this can actually permeate until the very end game, then combos could actually work. But again, combos don't last in games like this for long because of a simple fact of the matter called power creep. There's gonna be seasons, there's gonna be new things introduced to the game, and that's where power creep is gonna step in and make combos, if they're viable at the start, less viable over time. It always happens. It's impossible to avoid. Even if you try to avoid power creep for the maximum that you can, it's just really hard to do. But admittedly, that's super far in the future, so we can't really know how it's gonna go. But yeah, I am very interested. How the late game works. I don't believe combos are gonna survive that much, unless it's like a super damage insta-kill type of thing.
Fighting the bosses, one of the things I'm looking at is the stagger bar. When I'm playing my two-handed mace, I'm slowly staggering and building up this stagger bar. And each of the bosses have a unique animation of them staggering backwards when you actually fulfill that stagger bar, which gives you an opportunity to further attack them safely because they are staggered. So I found the...
By the way, I'm just gonna say that's all... as a Lost Ark player, I don't like the idea that this is the stagger bar. Whoop. I'm used to the stagger bar being as high, as full as the HP bar. Because this is kind of counterintuitive, because when he first actually staggered the boss here, I was looking at it, I noticed that it's a bot, and it's like, what, why is it staggered? What's going, hello? Yeah, so that's interesting.
So I found the game itself to be much more interactive in each of the combat scenarios, as opposed to just spam the one button and stay out of the red circle. It ends up becoming like, let me worry about the stagger bar, let me worry about the combo, let me dodge the combos that the bosses are doing. I actually felt like the combat in Path of Exile 2 has probably been my favorite combat out of any ARPG
to be fair, it looks really good, yes.
So far. And if I was comparing the combat in Path of Exile 2 to any other ARPG, I would have a hard time doing it. It actually reminded me more of No Rest for the Wicked, which is closer to a Souls-like game than anything. Now, this might sound, if you're a PoE 1 player, like it is almost totally different, but I think this is...
Yes, and I like that.
Mostly at the start of the game. You do still have the way itemization works. You can still slam items. You can still roll crazy DPS stats. And I was getting like double my DPS when I got the new weapon upgrade. So you're going to be blasting through with the higher...
Classic stuff, by the way.
Acts, no doubt. But in the beginning of the game, the impact of each of the individual fights and the boss fights felt difficult and just really strong and memorable, which for me was a an improvement over a lot of the other ARPGs I've played, where it's maybe I thought, oh, that was a cool, well-designed boss fight, but then what I'm doing, my part in the boss fight would be like extremely boring in some of these other games. Whereas in Path of Exile 2, I feel like my combat's good, what I'm worried about with the boss is good, the audio and the music is very good, the impactfulness and the theme of each of the boss fights are very good, and they're all fairly unique. So I have high praise for the boss fights. They're definitely going to have to do some balance.
I really, really want actually a game like this where, you know, it's your typical Diablo, Path of Exile, Last Epoch type of gameplay, but the bosses are actually challenging and good. Okay, I really want that. Because in PoE, let's face it, a bunch of bosses don't have really interesting mechanics, and a lot of them are kind of like almost, well, they are gear checks. Every game is a gear check to a degree, but maybe you get what I'm saying. But in any case, challenging, interesting bosses that are always going to be, you know, useful to dodge and do things like that. I like that. I really, really like that.
See, though, I got to a point where my two-handed mace could, like, stun lock some of the bosses. There's definitely some bugs and some issues with them getting stuck on things, and I saw this multiple times while I was there. But for the most part, I think that is just alpha testing stuff that will be fixed upon release of the game, and I'm sure it's going to be much more flushed out. I did want to take a moment to mention that WASD felt a lot better than I thought it was going to feel. There are some complaints about hotkeys, and that would be true. I'm sure that you could use an MMO mouse, but not everyone may want to do that. So using WASD.
What is an MMO mouse? The one with the buttons on the side, 1, 2, 3. I kind of like using the 1, 2, 3, but I haven't had that in forever. I haven't had that in more than like 5 years now, so it is what it is.
While trying to use like Q, E, R, T, etc. might be somewhat difficult while you're also moving, but the way the WASD works with your character facing where your mouse is pointed, that's actually quite important for things like shields, for instance, and felt correct. It felt like I was straight.
We actually saw him at the start move like that, because he was moving backwards, but he was facing the other direction.
As opposed to just like keyboard turning in World of Warcraft, for instance. So WASD felt significantly better than I thought it was going to, and it makes sense now why Jonathan Rogers had said that is what almost everybody internally has been using over there as well, because it feels very smooth. So a moment here to talk about in-game towards the end of this video.
By the way, the reason why using those keys to move is good is different, in my opinion, from probably a lot more people, because that means that movement has depth and movement is necessary and positioning is necessary and whatnot, which means that the game is harder by default and it requires more finesse. Again, I'm all about that finesse. You may want Path of Exile to work for different reasons than me, but I'm liking what I'm seeing, boys. I am liking what I'm seeing.
They did not show us the in-game while I was there. We got about 4.5 hours of gameplay that we were allowed to do, and during that time, people were making it through Act 1, maybe part of the way through Act 2. I don't think anyone actually made it to Act 3.
Yeah, but obviously the big cahoot here is the end game, how that is going to look, because that's going to determine a lot of things.
And they did not show us footage of the in-game. So as it currently stands, the only thing that I'm aware of is the early game of Path of Exile, and we are awaiting information on the in-game. It did seem, however, that going into Act 2, the gear drop started to ramp, my damage started to ramp, I started to feel much stronger very quickly, and so I'm sure that is going to carry through in progression throughout the acts, and as we get more towards in-game, we might actually end up seeing more of that Path of Exile 1 style of mapping and blasting through, as it did seem like it was leading in that direction.
Again, I don't believe that, okay? The systems that we have seen so far, the gameplay that we have seen so far, is not even, should not be even 1/10 of how Path of Exile 1 currently is playing at the end game. It should not be close.
But the beginning of the game is definitely going to be slower than you're used to. Overall, I enjoyed my time playing Path of Exile 2. I was looking forward to Path of Exile 2, but after actually playing it, I'm looking forward to it even.
Yeah, see that comet thing. Well, actually, this one time it was way faster than I remember seeing it.
I was looking forward to Path of Exile 2, but after actually playing it,
no, it's still pretty slow.
I'm looking forward to it even.
Yeah, again, I don't think mechanics that is a prime example of a mechanic that I think is gonna be removed. It just doesn't work. An animation that takes longer, like you do something and blah blah blah, that's fine. But then pushing your character back, no way, no way. I am willing to bet money on the fact that that's gonna be removed at some point or made almost not noticeable.
And more. Now, I think that they're going to have some announcements related to Path of Exile
Spears, love it.
2 as of the posting of this video, so hopefully we'll actually get some more information about the game that they did not share with us at the event. But as of today, I'm very optimistic about Path of Exile 2, and I will be looking forward to playing in any of the betas whenever that.
Yep, same. Very optimistic. Anyway, that was our boy, DM, Dark Microtransactions, Skittles. It is what it is. Diablo 4, bad. Path of Exile 2, the Diablo 4 that we wanted. Anyway, this was Quizzer Sid, and thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.